The cabin waited for him like a beast crouched in the fog. Daniel Briggs reined in his horse at the edge of the clearing, the smell of damp pine heavy in his lungs, his eyes narrowed against the fading light. The place looked smaller than he'd imagined from the land agent's words, but lonelier too, roofs sagging, shutters askew, the logs gray with years of storm. A man might call it shelter, or he might call it a grave. Daniel wasn't sure which he wanted more. He slid from the saddle, his boots sinking into half-frozen earth. The wind curled around the trees and carried a faint whistle that reminded him of battlefield cries long buried in his memory. He tightened his grip on the reins, then forced a laugh at himself. The war was done. His wife was gone. What remained was this cabin he'd bought cheap, and the hope, foolish maybe, that silence would feel like healing. Inside, the door groaned as if reluctant to let him enter. Dust veiled the air, stirred by his steps. A blackened hearth yawned empty, cold as the heart he carried. He touched the wall beams with calloused fingers and found carvings cut deep into the wood, strange lines, half circles, a pattern not meant for decoration. Protective charms, perhaps, left by the last man to live here. Or warnings. He shook his head. Every frontier cabin had its superstitions. Still, when the lone chair in the corner swayed gently without his touch, his stomach knotted. He told himself the draft was strong, but his hand went automatically to the revolver at his side. "Guess the ghosts paid rent before me," he muttered, voice dry with dark humor. That first night, he built a fire with wood stacked out back, its crackle steady against the cabin's groans. He lay on a cot that smelled faintly of resin and old sweat, sleep coming in fits. Somewhere in the black hours, a sound threaded through the walls. A woman's humming, soft as a lullaby. Daniel jolted upright, eyes wide, pulse hammering. He reached for his rifle and edged to the window. Beyond the frost-etched glass stood a figure at the tree lean, white against the dark. She was barefoot, hair tumbling long and silver in the moonlight, her posture still as carved stone. His throat tightened. For a moment he thought she was a dream, then the figure shifted her head toward him, and he caught the shimmer of eyes watching. The door burst open with his stride, the rifle braced. But the clearing lay empty. Only a line of small footprints pressed into the snow, fading toward the slope. He followed a few steps before the silence pressed too thickly, before the weight of unseen eyes made his skin prickle. When he returned to the cot, dawn was already greasing the sky pale. On the porch waited a loaf of bread, still warm, wrapped in linen. No rider had come, no tracks marked the ground. Daniel stared at it until his stomach growled louder than his suspicion, then tore off a piece. Whoever left it had baked it with care. Later, while splitting logs by the clearing, he felt the prickle again. He swung the axe down and caught movement between pines. A young woman stepped out, as if the forest itself had shaped her. She carried herself like someone both wild and weary, shoulders straight but eyes shadowed. A basket hung from one arm. "You're trespassing," Daniel said, though his tone lacked bite. "This cabin was not meant for strangers," she answered, voice low, carrying the rhythm of running water. "But now it's yours." He studied her, struck by how she looked both fragile and fierce. She must have been no older than 20, yet her gaze held storms. Her name came only after a silence. Ilara. Daughter of the mountain trapper who once roamed these ridges. She gave nothing more, only placed the basket at his feet, dried herbs, apples, smoked meat, and turned as though she'd vanish back into the trees. "Wait," Daniel called, surprising himself with the urgency. "Why bring me this?" Her lips parted, as if she might tell him, but instead she shook her head. "Because the mountain asked me to." Then she was gone, her steps swallowed by snow. The days fell into uneasy rhythm. Daniel patched the roof, chopped wood, tended his horse. Yet he always felt the cabin listening, the trees bending closer. Sometimes, at dusk, he saw Ilara watching from the slope, never approaching, never speaking. Other times she came near enough to exchange a few words, nothing more than warnings about wolves or the coming frost. Still, her presence threaded through his solitude like music he could neither forget nor name. At night, the humming returned, drifting through the cracks in the wall, lulling and unnerving all at once. Once he swore he heard her whisper his name. Another time, the voice was sharper, carrying words clear as glass. "Don't go into the cellar." until you're ready." Daniel froze, lantern trembling in his hand. He hadn't yet dared open the hatch beneath the floorboards, though he'd noticed its iron clasp. Now, with her voice still echoing, he felt both compelled and warned. The fire hissed low, shadows leaping. He stared at the trapdoor, the air thick with expectation. But the lantern flame sputtered suddenly, then died, plunging the cabin into black. He sat in the dark, heart thudding, and realized the silence had never felt heavier. Dawn broke pale and brittle, painting the clearing in ash and silver. Daniel sat on the porch, rifle across his knees, staring at the hatch beneath the floor he hadn't yet dared open. Ilara's warning gnawed at him like a splinter he could not dig out. He had fought battles where cannon fire shook the earth, yet nothing made his palms sweat like a woman's voice whispering from the walls. Her visits grew more frequent as the days shortened. Sometimes she brought venison jerky, sometimes bundles of herbs that smelled sharp and clean. She spoke little, but in her silence lay a gravity Daniel couldn't shake. He began to crave her presence, though he could never guess when she might appear. Once, while mending the fence, he caught her watching him with a faint smile, and for an instant the weight in his chest felt lighter. But shadows always trailed her eyes. It wasn't long before trouble rode up the trail. 3 men, hard-eyed and dust-coated, leaned in their saddles like vultures circling meat. The leader, a scar-faced brute with tobacco staining his teeth, reined close enough for Daniel to smell the whiskey on his breath. "Fine cabin you've got here," the man drawled. "Shame it don't belong to you." Daniel rose slowly, rifle cradled casual but steady. "I paid the deed. You got a claim, show it. Otherwise, you best ride on." The men laughed, harsh as gravel. "Paper don't mean a damn thing up here. Mountain decides who stays." The scar-faced man spat, his grin widening. "And she says you won't last." When they rode off, their laughter echoed long after the hoofbeats faded. Daniel stood rooted, fury burning low in his gut. He had lost too much to run again. Whatever they wanted, he'd face it. That night Ilara appeared without sound, slipping from the trees like mist. Her hands trembled as she placed them on the railing. "They'll be back," she whispered. "They know what's hidden here." His brow furrowed. "Gold?" Her eyes snapped to his, sharp and pained. "Not gold. A promise. My father carved it into these beams before he died. He swore to guard what lay beneath, and the mountain bound him to it. Every man who claimed this cabin paid the price. Blood for greed, bones for hunger. You think you bought a house, Daniel, but you bought a burden." He felt the ground tilt beneath him. "And you?" "I was left to keep watch," she said softly. "Until someone strong enough came. Someone the cabin would not devour." The words struck deeper than he expected, stirring the part of him that still mourned his wife, that still sought a reason to live. Yet fear coiled tight. He thought of the hatch, of what lay in the dark below, and his stomach turned. The gang returned at dusk, 6 this time, their torches throwing savage light across the clearing. Daniel braced in the doorway, revolver drawn. Ilara stood at his side, jaw set, eyes flashing with something fierce. The first shot cracked like thunder, shattering the night. Gunfire ripped the air, windows splintered, smoke and sparks clawed upward. Daniel fired with grim precision, every pull of the trigger echoing years of battle. Ilara fought like a spirit loosed from the mountain, slinging stones and wielding a hunting knife with desperate fury. But the men pressed hard. Flames licked the walls. Daniel felt the cabin itself groan as if reliving every death it had swallowed. Driven back, he stumbled onto the hatch. A stray bullet split the clasp, and the door yawned open into blackness. The stench of old earth and decay spilled upward. A voice, his own memory or perhaps the mountain itself, whispered, "Until you're ready." He fell inside. Lantern light from above cast shadows across what lay hidden, piles of bones stacked in corners, skulls grinning in eternal silence. No gold, no treasure, only the remains of men who thought they could claim what was never theirs. The truth clawed through him. The curse wasn't wealth but the hunger for it, the promise that the mountain devoured all who sought to own it. Above, Ilara's scream cut through the roar of fire. Daniel surged back up, rage eclipsing fear. He burst from the hatch, revolver blazing, cutting down the scar-faced leader where he stood. The others faltered, and the forest seemed to rise against them. The wind howled, trees groaned, and shadows stretched like claws. The men fled into the dark, their curses fading into the distance. When silence returned, the cabin was scarred but standing. Smoke curled from its roof, bullet holes stitched its walls. Daniel lowered his gun, chest heaving, and turned to Alara. She was bruised, blood streaking her arm, yet her eyes burned with relief. "You saw it," she said, voice raw. "I saw." His gaze drifted to the hatch, then back to her. "And I'll see it closed. No one else will feed that promise." She studied him, as if weighing the truth in his words. Slowly, she nodded. "Then maybe the mountain has chosen." Dawn crept pale over the ridge as they stepped outside, the fire's embers dying behind them. The forest smelled of pine and smoke, of endings and beginnings. Daniel looked at Alara, at the wild defiance softening into something like hope, and felt the first stirring of peace he'd known in years. "Sometimes a man buys a cabin," he murmured, eyes on the horizon. "Sometimes, the cabin buys him." The mountain wind carried no answer, only silence, yet it was no longer the silence of grief, but of a promise kept. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every tale carries its own weight. Maybe this one found you when you needed it most.